Rachel and this is Eleanor, and we're part of the Employability team at Your Homes Newcastle. We're here today to give you some information about application forms when you're looking for a job, things that you want to mention and things you want to avoid as well. So without further ado, what do you need to think about when you see a job that you want to apply for? Firstly, I would say before you do anything, research. You need to research the company, the organisation, the type of job it is. Make sure that the organisation fits with your values, but also make sure that your skills fit with the job and that it's something that you could see yourself doing as well. Read the application. So many times we see applications and they've told us a lovely story, but they haven't answered the question. Read your answers. And also, if you're old school like me, scribble it down with a pen and paper or use Word, but practice what you're putting. Sometimes the boxes and things can be formatted a little bit funny. So it's really important that you draft it and then you get the layout as you want it before you then copy it over to the application form.
Okay, so we're going to talk you through some of the key sections you get on most application forms. Obviously, they'll all be slightly different, but on the whole, they generally cover the same sorts of sections. So we're just going to talk you through each of those sections and give you a few hints and tips for each one. So firstly, you'd normally start with some personal details. Hopefully this is the easiest bit on the form. You're just going to put in your contact details, name, address, things like that. Think about your email address. Make sure it's a professional email address. You want something that says the right thing about you and isn't some silly email address that you may have set up to have with your friends. You might want to think about setting something up as a separate email address that you use just for job searching. You might be asked for things like your immigration status and visa number if that's applicable to you, so make sure you've got that to hand. And you also might need to give some details about your availability. So do you want part-time or full-time, and what sort of hours might you be able to work?
Next, at some point in the application, it will ask you for qualifications. Now, it may be that there's some essential qualifications that you need, or it may say list all relevant qualifications. I would always say, with the exception of your maths and your English, if you've got them, it's really important to list them. But with everything else, unless there's something that is essential, just list your qualifications for the last 10 years. Now, unless it's a textiles job or something like that, they probably don't need to know that you got a grade C at textiles in 1970. So just make sure that you keep it really relevant, and just be aware that any qualifications that you put down there, they can and probably will ask for proof of. So make sure you're telling the truth, but also make sure that you've actually got copies of your certificates, because sometimes you have to order them and they can take a little while and things like that if you can't find your originals. Often you will have done training and things at work, and it's really important that you shout about this because it shows that you're really engaged with employment and things like that. You may have done personal development, whether that's online courses, a night college course or something like that. Again, if they're relevant, put them on. I would always say, if you're unsure on whether they're relevant or not, ask somebody, there's always a number that says like, contact us for more information or something like that. Use that and ask them what qualifications they want to see. Sometimes if you're applying for a professional post, like a teaching post, a nursing post, something like that, they're going to ask you if you're a membership of any, if you have a membership of any professional bodies. That could be something like the nursing union and things like that. So just, if you've got that, make sure you put your number down. But often, if you haven't got it, you can just leave it blank. That's totally fine. So we're going to talk about employment history. Totally forgot that I was doing that there, but that's totally fine. We're going to talk about employment history. So it's going to ask you where you've worked in the past. There's a couple of things to remember here. Again, like qualifications, put down what's relevant. You're going to need references for most of your past employment. So make sure when it comes to your most recent, it'll often ask you what duties you've done. If you can link that to the job description, which Eleanor's going to talk to you about in a second. If you can link that to that, that's great. But it's absolutely fine to bullet point what your main duties and responsibilities were in your most recent role. Generally, they only ever ask you that for your most recent role. For your past roles, it will probably just ask you for dates. Again, you must make sure that those dates are accurate. You don't have to have the exact day of the month, but you do need to have the month and the year generally that we ask for. It's important to include on here any gaps in employment. So if you've had gaps to have children or to go traveling or to care for somebody, that's absolutely fine. But just make sure that you put it down, because otherwise they may feel like they need to ask you about that in interview. Any voluntary work, shout about it. If you do weekend work or anything like that, make sure that you talk about that as well. Now, it's really important to be honest about your reason for leaving, but at the same time, please be positive about that reason. And again, if you're struggling with anything like that, we can always help you as well. And we're going to talk about that at the end. When it comes to how far back, it very much depends on the relevance. If you've done pretty much the job that they're asking you to do 10 to 15 years ago, absolutely fine, put it down. If not, I would always say probably stick to the last 10 years. Equally, if you've had a lot of agency work or short-term contracts, that tend to be quite similar. So if you do a couple of weeks in one factory, a couple of weeks in the other, again, it's absolutely fine to group those together so that you're not taking up loads of space on your employment history.
Okay, so kind of linked into employment history is your references, which Rachel referred to there. And this is just something you need to give a little bit of thought to. So usually an employer will be looking for your most recent or your current employer as a referee. But do make sure you check the instructions and see what references they are looking for. They might want the last couple of references. They might need to go back so many years. So you need to make sure you're following those instructions. If you haven't had any work history, you can give a character reference, or perhaps your current job is the only job you've had. So you might need to give one employment reference and one character reference. That's absolutely fine. Try and choose somebody who you know professionally, so perhaps a tutor from college or something like that. It can't be someone who's related to you. So that's really important. You're often asked what the relationship of that referee is to you. This just means, was it your manager? Is it someone you know from a different walk of life, so a tutor or whatever it might be? So just make sure you're really, really clear. It's fine to put down an HR department if that's the best contact for your referee. Just make sure you're clear about what the relationship is. You do need to quite often give dates, so particularly if it's asking you to cover a particular period of time for your references, then it might ask you for the dates that those references refer to. Just make sure that tallies up with your employment history so that all kind of makes sense. So once you get to that point, you're into kind of the big white space on the application form that everybody dreads, which is the personal statement, or it might be called supporting information. Have different titles, but this is the area where you need to really sell yourself. It sometimes looks like this might be an optional section on the application form, but it's absolutely essential that you fill this in. Don't replace it by attaching your CV. That won't be considered. If you're asked to complete an application form, then that's what you need to do. And this is the bit that's mainly going to be used for your shortlisting. So to complete this, you really need to make sure that you're telling the employer why you're right for the job. And the main way you're going to do that is by having a look at the job description and the person specification. This is sometimes all in one document. It's sometimes two separate documents. It's really important that you understand the difference between the two. So the job description is, as it sounds, it's a description of the job. It's the tasks, it's the responsibilities, it's day-to-day what your duties would be if you did that job. The person specification is a little bit different. This is the criteria that the employer is looking for in the person that they want to employ. So they're looking for somebody to meet this criteria. So it could be things like skills, it could be qualifications, it could be particular experience. And this is the really, really essential bit that you need to look at and write about in your personal statement. Sometimes you'll find the person specification is split into essential and desirable criteria. This really just means that if it's essential, you absolutely have to have it to do the job. So if there's anything on there that you don't talk about in your personal statement, don't prove that you meet, you won't get an interview. The desirable criteria is used if there are lots of applicants and lots of them meet the essential criteria, then the employer will need a way of kind of whittling that down and getting to a smaller number to interview. So they'll start to look at the desirable. So as it sounds, desirable are the things that would be nice to have, but aren't essential. If you don't meet the desirable criteria, don't be put off. As long as you meet the essential, you can absolutely be considered. But if you do meet the desirable, then make sure you put them in there, because that's going to make your application much stronger. You want to also get something in about why you want the job. So an employer is going to be looking for someone who's interested, who's got a bit of passion and genuinely wants to work for them in that role. So give a little bit of information. Is it something you've always wanted to do? Is it something you're doing at the moment and think you're really good at? Is it something that you've kind of had a little taste at in your personal life and you'd really like to do as a particular profession? Have a think about why it is you want that job and why you want to work for that employer. You want to think a little bit about how you structure your application in terms of the personal statement. So you might want to work through that essential criteria point by point and perhaps do a separate paragraph for each one. Remember that employers are looking at sometimes hundreds of applications. You want to make it really, really easy for them to pick out what you're saying you've got and how you meet the criteria. So you could use subheadings if you like, but certainly separate it out into little paragraphs so it's very straightforward for the employer to cross-reference against the person specification and basically tick them off and say that you meet them. And lastly, on this point, proofread. This is so important. It's really easy to not be shortlisted because you've got spelling and grammar mistakes in your personal statement. Have a look at it yourself. Use the spell check on Word if you're using that, but always get somebody else to read over it. It helps to get somebody else to just check for spelling and grammar, but also make sure it reads all right. Does it all make sense? Is there anything that really doesn't flow very well? Or that's hard to understand? So always get somebody else to proofread it for you.
So that's the difficult bit over. Everyone at that point just thinks, I just want to press submit. I just want to get it away. There's just a few little things you normally need to do on an application form before you can press submit. Luckily for you, generally they're pretty much ticky boxes. The first thing is lots of organisations, not all, it's really important to say, but lots of organisations have what's called monitoring information. It could be called something like equality and diversity monitoring or something like that. But generally what this is just making sure that the company is recruiting a fair selection across the community. So for example, if YHN suddenly noticed that their employees were getting pretty old and that there wasn't anybody below the age of 30, we would go back to the HR, would go back to the monitoring information and go, well, actually, how many people have we had apply that are under 40? Is there a reason why they're not applying? So it could be where we're advertising, it could be qualifications that we're asking for that are quite hard to get. So there's lots of reasons behind it. This section is not used for shortlisting in any way, and it is entirely optional. What I would say is if you are saying you would rather not fill this in, it's absolutely fine, but make sure you tick the box that says prefer not to say. Otherwise, employers are just like, have they missed the page? Are they not answering it? We're not sure. The things that they ask you on there tends to be around your date of birth, your age, your sex, your sexual orientation, your religion, and your disability. So when it comes to disability, it's absolutely your choice whether to say whether you have one or not. If you have a disability, I would always say, please be honest and tell them. A couple of reasons why. They will ask you if you need adjustments made for interview. Now, the example that I always give with this is YHN House, for example, is across 3 floors. Pre-pandemic, we would always tend to interview on the top floor. If you have arthritis or something, you don't want to be climbing up 3 flights of stairs. So it's just so we know that you need to use a lift. Equally, it might be if there's a task to do, you might need that in large font or something like that. So it's our responsibility of making sure that you have fair access to the interview. Also, the guaranteed interview scheme means that if you do class yourself as disabled and you tick the box to say you would like to be considered for the guaranteed interview scheme, if you hit all of the essential criteria that Eleanor was talking about earlier, you are guaranteed an interview for that role. So you're actually putting yourself in really good positioning if you tick that box because you have a disability. Those characteristics that I mentioned before are protected, and we cannot recruit, no organisation can recruit based on your answers. So that's really important to know that it really shortlisting this isn't included in shortlisting. And finally, it will normally ask you on an application form if you have any criminal convictions. A lot of employers are really conviction friendly now, but what is essential is that you are honest about that, okay? It will generally ask you if your convictions are spent or unspent. if you're not sure, speak to the recruiting manager or speak to the HR department that's normally listed on the information for the job. I had an example a few years ago that I was recruiting somebody and they ticked that they didn't have any convictions. For the particular job in question, they needed a DBS, which is a criminal convictions check. That criminal conviction check came back that he did have a conviction. He didn't get that job. And what I really want to stress is he didn't get the job, not because of the conviction, but because he hadn't told us about the conviction. If he had told us about the conviction, he would have been fine. It was something from 20 years ago. It wasn't a big deal, but it was the fact he lied. So really be honest about that, because you will get found out, and it's just easier if you're truthful from the start.
Okay, and then that's it. You get to the end of the application, hit that submit button, and keep your fingers crossed, and that's brilliant. But what we really wanted to say to you is, if you're a YHN customer, we can help you with this. As you can see, it's quite a big process. There's a lot of work involved, and we can give you support with that. We can help you one-to-one with your applications, if that's something that would be helpful to you. So if you're a YHN customer and would like a bit of support from us, just get in touch, drop us an email, give us a ring. You can see our details on the screen there, and we can just drop us a text. We can get back in touch with you, and we can arrange to kind of give you that bit of support depending on what it is that you need. We're a friendly bunch and we like to give people a hand, so do get in touch. But good luck with all your applications. I really hope you found that helpful.